Hi, everyone. Welcome to 10 Key Reports That Every Talent Leader Needs, presented by Caroline Stevenson, Head of People at GEM. I know this is an important topic to many of you here today, and I'm looking forward to hearing what Caro has to share with us. Caro, thanks for being here today. Over to you.
Thanks, Callie. Super excited to be here and to talk all things reporting. Today, we're going to dive into a lot of best practices and not just talk about metrics, but really talk about what it means to be strategic when you're reporting. So diving in, talent acquisition and reporting used to be really simple. You would traditionally report on efficiency metrics, things like time to hire, cost per hire, and very simple number of hires. But there's a few issues with these numbers. One is that they're reactive. So they tell you what's already happened in the past, and they might not actually help you figure out how to do anything better in the future. They're also one size fits all. So any person can run these numbers for their organization or their company, but they really don't take into account anything unique to what's going on at your company or within your recruiting pipeline. Recruiting metrics have evolved to become a lot more actionable and strategic. And frankly, so is the recruiting technology that goes along with it. It's become way easier to build reports that you can link directly to business outcomes, which is great because when the analytics that you report on are really rooted in the context of your broader business objectives, recruiting isn't viewed as tactical and reactive anymore, but it really becomes a strategic arm to your business. So how do you make the transition from metrics to being more strategic when you report? There are 4 best practices that I can walk through. The first one is not fixating on the past. So this is a trap that's really easy to fall into, but what you want to do is use historical data from the past to predict the future. The second is to make sure that you know your organizational goals first. By taking a business outcomes first approach, you'll remind your C-level executives that recruiting is a really strategic function, and then it can have the highest business impacts on the organization when it's aligned with those broader goals. The third is you have to remember that the best comparisons are actually internal to your company. So use your own internal benchmarks whenever you can, and you can use them to report on things like percentage of improvement over last quarter or last year, or compared to your best quarter ever, and so on and so forth. Lastly, you want to report on why something happened or is happening rather than only what happened. Your data should be actionable. So now let's dive in. I want to share some best practices when you're reporting to CEOs and other C-levels within your organization. To start, I thought I'd share a really quick stat. According to a recent survey, only 12% of CEOs found the recruiting metrics they're shown to be useful. When I think about this is really crazy. And my hypothesis is that this might tie back to those simple reports that we talked about earlier, where recruiting teams are reporting on very simple metrics like time to hire and number of hires. And we talked about the inherent problems with these, largely that they're not actionable. They report on what happened, but not why something happened. So it's really hard to improve or know how to improve over time. So what do C-levels want to see in reporting? They really want the high-level stuff. They want to understand how recruiting affects the bottom line of their business. They want to know about increasing revenue, productivity, innovation. It's really the big picture stuff. And if you're not super clear on what this means for your company, I encourage you to sit down with your CEO, your COO, and your CFO to collectively determine the metrics that are going to matter most to them. They also care a lot about transparency. So make sure that you share any metric that significantly impacts business results, whether that reflects, positively or negatively within your own recruiting team. Percentage of key jobs not filled is a specific metric that I think your C-level should be updated on regularly. I recommend doing this alongside a predicted time to fill metric for those unfilled roles, and you can use all of your historical data to help predict that time to fill for them. Most teams have hiring targets, whether you set them monthly or quarterly, and they're going to be different for every team, but you should anchor off of those when you're reporting on this. You have hiring targets because without them, it's really hard to know if you're tracking to support the company's needs. And the longer a rec stays open, quarter over quarter or month over month, the more likely you are to cripple the business results in that area. So being able to forecast out that you should be able to fill an unopened role in a certain number of months or quarters is going to be super helpful to set expectations and to help understand how that timeline might impact the overall business. I actually don't think that there's a wrong time to share this report either. It's always good to have a regular cadence to check in and show, who you've hired, who you still need to hire, and what the projected time to hire is for those still open roles. Whether that's a mid-quarter report or an end-of-quarter report, I would say that you should align with your C-levels and hiring managers on, when they want to see this. However, when it comes to any management or executive roles that you are reporting as unfilled, I definitely recommend giving your executives a more in-depth, overview of where in process those roles are, and highlight any roadblocks that you're working through with them. They'll likely want to know a lot more details for more senior roles, as those tend to have larger business impacts. Cost of vacancy is another metric that you'll want to share with your C-levels. Another way to think about this metric is simply dollars of revenue lost due to vacancy days of a role that went unfilled. So C-levels will especially want to know this number when it comes to high-pry revenue-generating roles. There's a measurable dollar loss for each excess day that a revenue-generating role is vacant. And work with your CFO to see if you can come up with a dollar amount on that lost revenue. The most basic method of calculating cost per vacancy is to divide your company's revenue per employee. So annual revenue divided by total number of employees, then divide by the number of working days in the year so that you can calculate the daily loss. One thing to note is that revenue generating roles like sales and engineering, along with any executive roles you might have, are going to have a higher cost per vacancy than most other roles that you're reporting on. Another way to think about this is also just general productivity. Can you identify any projects that are delayed due to vacant roles? And can you actually put a price on that delay? See if you can work with hiring managers to see if you can determine that lost productivity metric that might be interesting to report on. Then once you have these metrics, look for changes over time. So look to see if there's been a historical improvement in the number of excess vacancy days, month over month or quarter over quarter. And if so, that number really, really helps demonstrate how recruiting impacts the bottom line of the business when you can tie it back to revenue. Lastly, when you talk about cost of vacancy, it's equally important to show up to these meetings with the vacancy metrics as it is to show up with some general plan on how you can improve the days vacant. I don't think any CEO wants to hear about how expensive it is to have vacant days without a plan on how you're going to reduce that cost over time. Great. So diversity. Across the board, diversity in your pipeline should be reported to your C-level executives. If nothing else, the diversity of your workforce should ideally reflect the diversity of your customer base or that of your ideal customer base. Make sure to build a diversity strategy and hold yourself accountable to those numbers in every report that you share. Some things that you might want to report on are, what does diversity look like at the very top of the funnel? Or how might those top of funnel numbers impact the overall composition of your teams, especially when you look at your historic pass-through rates? You want to also make sure that you leave room in your executive report and in your conversations for something outside of those fixed metrics that we just talked about. The talent problems that are super top of mind for your executives are likely going to look different quarter over quarter. So pay attention what's on their agenda and what's top of mind for them. The metrics we've talked about so far, hiring speed, revenue, diversity, ROI of recruiting, but the executives are also likely going to care about innovation, internal mobility, leadership development, and more of those things at different points over time. So keep a pulse on that, and build room into your report to report on whatever's top of mind for them at that moment. I included one example here, which I know is something that is super top of mind for a lot of executives, which is diversity. A lot of execs are asking for more detailed reports on what the diversity in their recruiting funnels look like. So this is an example of a report I might share. It shows your pass-through rates in your funnel broken down by race, ethnicity, and gender. Great, moving on. Would love to talk through some of the reporting that you should be looking at for recruiters and sourcers. And starting again with a quick stat, only 25% of companies make recruiting data available to their entire recruiting team. This is a shame because there's so much that you can learn from both diving into your own numbers, but also looking at your teammates' numbers. So I thought I'd talk through what numbers are important to look at and report back on. The first metric is time to fill. Your time to fill measures the efficiency of your entire recruiting process. A slow time to fill can negatively impact company productivity, revenue, candidate experience, and even quality of hire, since your best candidates might take offers elsewhere if they feel like you're not respecting their time. You can use historical time to fill data to forecast how long it's going to take to fill new recs. So you want to make sure to track this metric for the sake of preparation and planning. Also, compare your hiring efficiency by benchmarking against industry averages. How do you stack up? If you're hiring slower than average, it might be a good idea to take a much deeper look at each stage in the process. How much time does it take to move candidates between stages? Where are the recruiters spending too much time and energy? Are parts of your process redundant? Are there places you can automate? These are all really, really good questions to ask when looking at time to fill. Alternatively, if you see that a role is like super efficient, you're filling it quickly, and it's benchmarking better than average, ask yourself, what about this role or this recruiter is working well here? What parts of the process are really efficient? And can you apply this to other roles to make other roles and processes even more efficient? That's actually a really nice segue into pass-through rates. So as many of you may know, pass-through rates are the percentage of candidates that move from one stage to the next in your recruiting process. Looking at pass-through rates can really help you measure the effectiveness of each stage in your recruiting funnel. If you have low pass-through rates, you can dig in to see where candidates are dropping out of the process or identify where there might be bottlenecks. If your pass-through rates are too high, on the other hand, it might indicate that you're letting too many candidates through each stage and you need to tighten your filters a little bit. Extremely high pass-through rates might be an indicator that you're not really being super selective about the talent you're hiring if most people that you initially talk to are making it all the way through the process and getting an offer. I have to shamelessly plug Gem here. This slide shows a screenshot of the pipeline forecasting report that I run pretty frequently. You can play around with your pass-through rates for each stage and see how that changes your overall recruiting funnel. For example, if you can improve your pass-through rate from phone interview to onsite by X%, how does that change how many candidates you need to engage with to make one hire? I recommend pulling a pipeline report like this weekly when you're actively working on a role to make sure that your pass-through rates look really healthy and that you're on track with your forecasted numbers. You can also use this report to identify the average number of days candidates are sitting in each stage, which again will help you debug or improve your overall time to fill and can help you dig into any inefficient stages in your recruiting process. Moving on to sources. So looking at your source of hire will assess how many candidates and how many qualified candidates are entering your funnel from any given source, whether that might be LinkedIn, social networks, job boards, referrals, internal candidates, agencies, or elsewhere. There's a lot of places you might be finding candidates. This can also assess where successful candidates first heard about your job opening. For example, is that your careers website, your company's Facebook page, job search sites, etc. The point here is to uncover which recruiting channels are the most effective in attracting qualified candidates to your organization, and which ultimately yield the best and fastest hires for you. because that's how you're going to determine A, where to most efficiently allocate your recruiting spend, and B, which channels to stop spreading yourself thin for, and C, which programs and tools you might actually want to invest more in. All right, moving on to reporting for hiring managers. Got another fun stat for everyone. 70% of hiring managers believe that their recruiting orgs need to become more data-driven in order to improve long-term business impact. They also fully rely on talent leaders and recruiters and sourcers to provide those data and insights for them. In terms of collaborating and working with hiring managers, recruiters and hiring managers should ideally have regular check-ins, when they have open roles, but also when they don't have open roles. This helps remind hiring managers that recruiters are really those strategic partners rather than those reactive support members. If the hiring managers know that they'll have upcoming roles, now is a great time to look into past recruiting efforts, see where there might be room to improve, dive into sources, time to fill, pass through, all of that stuff, and look into those numbers to see where you can invest more. It's also a great time to align on a nurture strategy. Who do you want to continue building relationships with, even without open roles right now? Who should you be keeping top of mind and engaging with and keeping warm? Also, talk about where you see the org going. What are the upcoming needs, 6 months to a year from now, and how can you start planning and getting ahead of those? One thing that you might want to consider when you're actively working with a hiring manager is using a capacity report. I strongly recommend doing this for any evergreen roles that you might have open. And these are roles that you're hiring for over and over again, usually like engineering or account executives, customer success managers, etc. A capacity report will help tell the hiring manager how many total hours are expected of the team in helping to make this hire. Every hour that employees spend helping their team hire is an hour that they're not spending on their core work. And hiring managers, it's really helpful for them to know how many hours their team is going to be taking out for interviewing so that they can effectively balance the work of the business with the work of interviewing. Hours expected interviewing is calculated by taking the amount of time each stage in the hiring process has historically taken and the number of candidates your forecasting tool tells you that you're going to need in that stage to make the hire. Hypothetically, if a first round interview for your engineering roles are 30 minutes long, and it's historically taken 12 first round interviews to yield a single hire, based on all your pass-through rates, that's 36 hours of engineers' time just spent in those first round interviews. So you want to do this math for every stage in the process and sum it all up to understand the total number of engineering hours it might take to make one hire. Once managers know how many hours you'll need to make that hire, they can figure out how to distribute hiring hours across the team. If they don't feel like they have the capacity to do all of the interviewing, you also may want to discuss how to make the process shorter to reduce that time. Cool. Another report your hiring manager will want is a pipeline report. Hiring managers should be updated weekly on what their pipelines look like for open roles. So make sure to set a regular cadence in which you or your recruiters pull a report and give them a snapshot of the funnel as it stands. There's also a lot of things to cover here, but I would say the table stakes things that you might want to report on are how many candidates are in each stage of your process right now, and how does that compare to what you forecasted and what your historical data is telling you that you'll need to have in order to make the hire. Also, I'd look at weekly activity. So what's happening this week that's worth reporting on? Maybe it's the number of interviews that are scheduled, or highlighting a few candidates that might be in phone interview or on-site stage that you're particularly excited about. Lastly, I'd make sure to look for any trends or roadblocks that you might want to bring up. So how quickly are candidates moving from one stage to the next in the process? And if your days in stage metric is really high, what's your recommendation for debugging the inefficiencies there? Where are the good candidates dropping out? And are there patterns there that you should talk about? For example, are you seeing that you're losing female identified candidates at higher rates than male identified candidates? And if so, you should discuss what's happening so you can make your pipeline a little bit more equitable. The two last metrics worth reporting to hiring managers are in the results of your candidate experience surveys and also your offer rejection reasons. So some questions that I might ask here are, do candidate surveys suggest that there are things that either hiring managers, interviewers, or recruiters can do to improve the hiring process from their perspective? Also, did the tone with them through the process feel impersonal? Did candidates get the sense based on the team culture that they would or wouldn't feel a sense of belonging? Is there any patterns in candidates dropping out of the process, maybe because hiring managers are taking too long to move forward, there was a lag in the recruiting process, so on and so forth? And HR should really also update hiring managers on new hire satisfaction. So recruiters and hiring managers can work together on making any hiring process improvements that would ultimately make for happier hires. All right, and that is it. There are, if you take anything away from today's presentations, I think that there are three main takeaways. The first is that you want to use different reports for different stakeholders. C-levels, hiring managers, and all ICs all care about different things and should all be getting different reports from you. The second is provide actionable insights and recommendations. Don't just retroactively report on what happened, but report on why things happened so you can take action on your data. And then three, make sure that you're positioning recruiting as a strategic partner. And the best way to do this is always trying to tie recruiting back to your company's broader goals and bottom line, so you can show how recruiting impacts the company's bottom line revenue. And that is it on my end. I'm happy to take any questions if we have time.
Yes, thank you so much for those reporting tips, Kara. We do have a few questions for you.
Great.
The first one is, what diversity metrics do you have in place and hold your team accountable for?
Yeah, this is a really great question. Let's see, taking a step back, at GEM, diversity is always really top of mind. It's actually one of our 4 core values. And we come back to this question frequently. Actually, every year we look at our strategy and we reevaluate to see if it's the right strategy. So we started off by having targets at the very top of the funnel. So we targeted 60% of our phone interviews to be held with underrepresented candidates. And we did this by a lot of direct sourcing for underrepresented candidates. We went 100% outbound sourcing, and this helped offset the referrals that we would get, which are great and I think very natural for a startup, but also tend to be really non-diverse. But now, present day, our 2020 strategy has evolved, and we actually have 2 different strategies depending on the type of role that we have open. And so the 2 ways we think about it is the role evergreen, so a role that you hire for over and over again, or if it's a one-off role, so it comes up once in a blue moon. It's not a continual pipeline you're building. For our one-off roles, our strategy is actually very much the same, going 100% outbound, focusing on underrepresented candidates. And then for our evergreen roles, we actually focus a little bit more on long-term engagement strategies, since it can be really easy to exhaust a talent pool pretty quickly if you're continually hiring for the same role year over year. But there's really a lot that you can track here. This is what we do, but some other things that we keep an eye on, and I think are great things to look at in your funnels too, looking at response rates, right? So are you getting similar response rates for underrepresented candidates that you are from other candidates that you're reaching out to? And then also digging into pass-through rates. So we keep an eye on are the underrepresented candidates in our pipeline passing through our interviews and each stage of the funnel at a similar rate to other candidates as well.
Thank you for that answer. Our next question is, how often should we be reporting to C-levels?
Yeah, good question. I would say you should actually align with your C-levels on this and see how much reporting that they want and when they want reports. But my hunch would be once or twice a quarter would be pretty good, either end of quarter results, and then maybe also they would like a mid-quarter update on on where you are mid-corner. But I would definitely align with them. Maybe they want reporting more frequently.
All right, let's do one more question. What is being discussed in those regular check-ins with hiring managers when there's no hiring needed by the hiring manager?
Yeah, good question. I think this ties back to like being more of a strategic partner to a hiring manager instead of a reactive partner waiting for a role to open. We all need to be hands on deck, figuring out how to immediately get it filled. If they're a hiring manager that you've worked with previously, digging into your pipelines and the efforts that you've worked on previously together, taking the time to debrief, dive into the data, see where you can do better, improve your process, be more efficient, have a better candidate experience. I would say that's a great thing to dive into during this time. And then also working with them, on a little bit bigger picture, where they see their org going, what investments with hiring that they need to make over the years, and how you can get strategic and starting to think through those now versus reactive, waiting for them to come up and starting to partner with them.
All right, that's all we've got time for today. Carol, thank you so much for being here and sharing those tips with us. Audience,
Kelly.
Thank you. Audience, thank you for joining us at GEM Summit and participating in this presentation. We'll see you back again in the general session, and have a great afternoon. Bye.